Alrighty, cool. Can you hear me just to make sure I don't? Cool. All right. So I have a lot to get through, so let's just like jump straight into this. Firstly, there's a few things I want to characterize, and then going to outline a few things. So to start with, this is not a curbing of free speech because there is a very clear distinction between fake news and free speech. I don't know if you wanted to talk about that. If you don't, that's great because that works for both of us. Secondly, this is not going to be a subjective thing. It's not like the Facebook moderators are going to be using their own personal biases to be talking about or to be moderating certain articles out, because what is fake news, whether or not someone agrees or disagrees with it, whether or not it's from the left or from the right or from anything that's not politically related. Fake news is fake news, and there's no subjectivity about that. And then thirdly, so we're just going to restrict this to the actual Facebook program itself, not the entire company. So that means that things like Instagram, Snapchat, and all the other subsidiaries of Facebook are discounted just for the purposes of this debate. And also going to be restricting this to the US just so that the debate doesn't get like super messy, but also the highest percentage of Facebook users actually comes from the US. So I thought it's probably appropriate to keep it there. And also some of my points are fairly related to things that have happened in the US in the last 12 months anyway. So before I get into the actual points, just going to outline them, and then I can go to you for your opening, and then we'll get into substantive stuff. So first point is going to be talking about like echo chambers and why they're really bad and the effect that they have on the rest of the world. And then secondly, flowing from there, going into democracy and how this actually harms the democratic process. And then thirdly, what Facebook's obligation to moderating this sort of thing out is, and whether or not they have that obligation. And so that will be kind of be integrated, but if I have any time at the end, I'll talk about it then. But anyway, over to you for your opening, and then we can get into the actual substantive stuff.
Can you hear me? Good. Okay, perfect. Let's get into this. I want to congratulate my opponent on making it to round two. Thank Qual out and all that good jazz. Let's get into the specific situations here. I'm going to start with just his four little points, and then I'll give my three outlines, and I'll throw it back over to him. One, this is not a freedom of speech debate. I specifically disagree whether it's fake or true. Freedom of speech is freedom of speech. You have the freedom to speak. There is no specific in the Constitution that says you cannot speak fakely. You cannot speak any of these different things. And I'm going to be using articles and situations about how Facebook's not the only person that specifically does this. So I do think freedom of speech, but specifically because freedom of speech talks about freedom of press in there also. So I completely disagree and say we cannot take the Constitution out of this, especially when he says we're going to restrict this to the United States. He can't say we're going to restrict this to the United States and then not use an amendment of the Constitution. So I'm going to disagree with that specifically based on his fourth little objective there. Two, non-subjective and no bias. Again, this is a part of talking specifically about journalism and news, which is very subjective and very biased. And what's fake for one person might not be fake for another. So I'm going to disagree with that, because what is subjective, everything you read, you have a subjective opinion on. Therefore, subjective and bias comes into play when news is going specifically. And then he says we're going to restrict to Facebook specifically. When it comes to fake news, that's fine. That's what we're debating, but I'm going to show how it's non-unique in other situations. So I don't really agree with his contentions. You can't restrict freedom of speech, especially if you're going to say specifically to the United States, when that's one main part of our Constitution. Then going on to my case is going to be strictly, I'm going to talk about uniqueness, how this isn't a unique problem, and any advantages that he's going to claim, he can't claim specifically because it's going to happen on other sources. Two, is going to be how fake news can spark education and debate. And then three, the freedom of speech and freedom of press. So that's kind of my outline. I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, so in terms of those contentions, I didn't think we were going to talk about it for that long, but whatever, these things happen. So firstly, the distinction between fake news and free speech is that fake news is factually untrue. It's not subjective in the sense that some people might think that this is fake. What's fake for one person is fake for another. No. What fake news is news that is completely and factually untrue. It is very different from freedom of speech, because I understand that people have that freedom of speech. Whether or not they should is another debate, because I think that in some instances that should be restricted, but that's not relevant here. In terms of fake news, it is the types of things that are just factually untrue. Like, let's look at some of the fake news that gets proliferated on social media, specifically Facebook, right? And it hasn't happened for a while, but there was a time a few years ago where for a very long time, there were a number of articles that came up saying RIP to this celebrity and to that celebrity because they wanted to perpetrate this fake news that that person had died, and then that became a trending thing, and then everyone freaked out. Oh my gosh, Johnny Depp died when actually he didn't, and they did that to a number of people. And so that's the type of fake news that I'm talking about. The type of fake news that I don't think is fake to start with is the things that people disagree with. Obviously, people have their own personal biases. Obviously, journalism has its own personal biases. But at the point in which those biases are still influencing what is somewhat true to an extent, then that is no longer fake news. Because whether or not that interpretation is right or wrong does not necessarily mean that the facts that come from the base of that story are true or untrue. The types of fake news that we're talking about are the things where the basis of that story is completely fake. Regardless of what the interpretation and what the biases that come from there are, these stories as a whole, from the base, are completely wrong. That is what fake news is. That what you wanted to talk about is not fake news. What you wanted to talk about is the biases that come from journalisms and those kinds of things. And like, I can see you shaking your head, but you'll get your turn in a second. So just like, let me have my rant. So in terms of, like freedom of speech and things like that, like obviously I understand that the press, journalists, and people have their own freedom of speech. But at the point in which they are proliferating fake things and things that are just factually incorrect, and that comes at a detriment. Obviously, I'll get to those detriments later when we get into them. But at the point in which that freedom of speech comes, or that ability to proliferate fake and factually incorrect news articles, that comes at a detriment to other people, then it should be moderated. Of course, they might have that ability to talk to a specific person, but Facebook's obligation to do that is quite large, given that they are an absolute monolith in terms of the digital age and things like that. And so the amount of people that have access to this information on Facebook is so huge that Facebook has an obligation to be moderating what is true and untrue. Obviously, journalist bias can come into this, but when fake news, when those articles are completely fake, they need to be modded out.
Okay, so going on to this, again, he's talking about specifically untrue, and he uses the example of like people who are dead and the whole scam of celebrities coming dead. The one thing I want to talk specifically about this is still we have the freedom to be able to do that. We have a holiday specifically called April Fool's Day, where people post different articles and do different things to trick people and to joke people and to play pranks on people. And if I want to do that, I have the freedom to do that. April Fool's Day is a holiday that's celebrated, whether it be somebody had died, whether it be somebody that saying I'm pregnant and I'm really not. That's something that people do on April Fool's Day. People play pranks all the time on Facebook, and that's a right that people have. It's a way to engage with others and to be able to tell people different things that are going on and to joke and to even have that. That's what Facebook is about. It's about engaging. Whether you want to do it on a real or a fake basis, you have that right, and there is freedom of speech in that. So I don't disagree with I don't agree with what he's saying there. We have the right to be able to do that. Specifically link April Fool's Day here about how people have that. There's a holiday that exists that people have created that is a fooling holiday. And if we want to be able to do a prank or somebody being dead or something specifically about that, then that is warranted and that's okay. So he's limiting this to just the fake news of deaths, and that's the only real example that I have here. I don't see where there's any harm and there's no disadvantages he's claimed. I'm going to get into my case a little bit. One, on my uniqueness argument, Facebook censoring fake news doesn't stop the problem of fake news occurring. And we're going to talk about this to link into this argument also. Facebook is a sharing site. It's not a source of the fake news. The problem doesn't come at the site of sharing. It comes from the source. If you go to fakenewswatch.com, it lists over 100 sites that are regularly known for fake news. B, Facebook was not the start of fake news spreading, and it won't be the end. Before Facebook, there was email. People got junk and spam emails about fake news all the time. And that was before, and even after, you're going to have blog sites, Twitter, other things that are going to exist to be able to spread these fake news. He can't grasp any advantages from Facebook censoring when this goes on. And he's also talking about fake news. If you look at the grocery store, when you go to the grocery store, there's tabloids everywhere. The National Enquirer, Bigfoot is alive, vampires have happened. People grocery shop as much as they're on Facebook. And this is a weekly occurrence for individuals, and they're still getting fake news. My second contention is fake news allows for education. The 2016 election was the most talked about election in our history. According to CNN article, it says that Whether the information was fact or fiction, Facebook helped to make the election a forefront. My argument on this is the specific argument that even if it's fake news, it allows for someone else to correct the fake news. If I post Andrew Gibson died today, it allows you to be able to create the conversation and call people out and even debate on Facebook. It also makes people research the source to be able to find if this is happening. This allows for debate, argumentation, and research, which is the things that even this website Qual-Out specifically stands for.
Okay, so I have a couple of bits of rebuttal. Firstly, April Fool's being a holiday. That's fine. You can do that on April Fool's. But when the joke starts on April Fool's and is still going at the end of December, then that joke is no longer a prank. That is someone proliferating fake news, and it needs to stop there. Secondly, in terms of this doesn't stop with Facebook, it didn't start there. It's not going to stop there. People are getting fake news from other things. I would say that that's probably true. But the effect that people get from fake news on Facebook is far wider, considering that Facebook only a few days ago hit 2 billion active users worldwide. That's fine to talk about grocery. And so when we talk about that 2 billion, let's look at the specific stats, right? 67.5% of Americans are active Facebook users. That means that that there is a significant portion of American people who actively use Facebook and are actively exposed to this information. Now, why is that particularly bad? That's bad because at the point in which they're being exposed to this, and like, let's look at the last 12 months, right? So of that 67.5%, 54 of them watched at least one video, 47 of them read an article, and then 46% read a news story. That means that these news stories, the potential for this fake news to be proliferated is incredibly high. But let's just also not just talk about celebrity deaths, because there's far more other examples than things like that. That's just one extreme, like the celebrity gossip kind of thing, right? The other extreme is that it lures impressionable people into false detrimental beliefs on a group or a particular person. This looks like things like character attacks on in the specific context of the election. It looks like fake character attacks on Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, which are obviously bad for either or. That translates into the Democratic argument, which I'll get to later. But it also means attacks as groups, right? So there are a significant portion of people worldwide, and also like probably in America too, which believe that all gay men are pedophiles because they've read those fake news articles that literally paint them all with that brush to say that all of that particular group is one thing or another. That also is the same with people's misguided beliefs of particular religions, that all Christians are this, all Muslims are that. And so at the point in which these things happen, it's detrimental not only to that person, but also that group. It creates stereotypes. Now, why is that bad, and why can't people break out of that? The precise reason why call-out exists, because of things like echo chambers, is because they are so highly proliferated on Facebook, and it is very hard to break out of those echo chambers, because at the point in which the Facebook algorithms work, you only see things that you've previously indicated that you like or dislike, and it means that the things that you share, you probably only share those things to people who have similar beliefs, which means that you're not likely to have a large amount of engagement with people who actually disagree with that. I do not think that education is a good enough point for this, for Facebook to not do this, because it doesn't educate people. It actually creates worse echo chambers than did before, because people aren't engaging with the...
Okay, so going back up on here, he names some stats and he says that Facebook is a wider spectrum and all of this, but I don't believe that that's true. Yes, Facebook is a spectrum, but it's not the only spectrum. And if people don't have Facebook to be able to do this, there's other sources that can go. Twitter, news articles, these different things that I've seen on the news itself. But then he leads all these specific statistics. 54% has watched a video, 57% has done this, and 46% has read an article. There's no direct link that any of this is specific towards fake news. Like, there's no direct impact in his information here that says that the 46% of people watched a fake news article or read a fake news article or watched a fake news video. There's no link and no relation of this. It could have been one of the funny cat videos that people watch. There's no specific points on this that links this to fake news. Therefore, that statistic has no weight in this debate. Then he goes into this about how there's fake character attacks on different people. And he says that all men are pedophiles, that there's things that all Christians are Muslims, or all Christians are bad or married. It creates this stereotype that they're going. One, these stereotypes exist outside of Facebook. For him to say that this is specifically because of Facebook is a claim with no warrant. There's no warrant that Facebook is what's creating this, or no link to Facebook being the creation. This has happened before. It happens with people before on the news. People say these on news articles, on CNN, on stereotypes. When we go to character attacks on people, that didn't just happen on Facebook. That happens on CNN. That happens on Fox News. That happens on the websites that I listed earlier. Different people like that exist because of that. Again, he doesn't attack the part where Facebook isn't the source for this. They're just somebody that shares these articles and shares their opinions. Then he goes into the algorithms that says that this is something that's not going to reach the right amount of people. Again, I disagree with this point completely, because I specifically in mind see articles and news things and stories and shares that don't relate to me as a white straight American in Texas. I see articles about gay pride and women's marches and all these different things, and I react to them in my own way. I mean, I'm not one that's against that, but that's irrelevant to this debate. But I do react to that. You can even look, Facebook engages stereotypes. They put a Pride React button on their Facebook last month. They're not saying any negative stereotype or negative connotations. These algorithms show who you're engaging with. Therefore, it still sparks education. People are able to say, I disagree with what you just said about this person. I disagree with what you've said. And the CNN article that I said specifically said that, fake news or not, people were giving their ideas about the election. They were giving their beliefs. They were giving these different things. So it didn't happen. These echo chambers that he's saying that exist, one, they're non-unique, and two, it allows for the echo chambers to engage each other. Whether you take Facebook out of it, Facebook is just a way for people to engage. These stereotypes and things would still exist even if they couldn't engage on Facebook specifically. There's no uniqueness to his arguments.
Okay, that's fine to say that, like, this stuff is going to happen elsewhere. It's still going to happen on Twitter, on CNN, still going to happen with fake news. The very difference is that Facebook, specifically in America, caters to over 200 million people. That is more that can be said about not only about any part or any amount of people that might use Twitter. Like, let's be real, Facebook has so many more users in America than Twitter does. There's probably so many more people that engage with the material on Facebook than they do with CNN, Fox News, and with the people in their lives, and things like the tabloids and groceries, because they probably only do that once a week, whereas they see Facebook every day, right? The thing that you wanted to talk about, like, you happen to see things that you're not specifically interested in, or that might not relate to you. You are one person out of 200 million. Just because it's fine for you, for that happened to you, that doesn't mean that every single other person in this in America or that uses Facebook in that context is exactly the same, right? And so at the point in which, like, or actually, let's talk about this education thing and that engagement, right? So, like, I told you earlier that engagement doesn't happen, but let's just assume that sometimes it does, because, like, I think it's pretty fair to say that it does happen sometimes, right? If the engagement does happen, especially when you look at the extreme fringes of, like, left, right-wing politics or whatever, or something in a different context, that engagement is usually very ineffective, right? Like, you look at people like Milo Yiannopoulos and all of his followers. You try telling them that they're wrong because their viewpoints are false, and that they have, like, this weird viewpoint, or that whatever they say is factually incorrect. Like, you try to tell them that that's not true and that they need to have that open discussion. It's not going to happen. And it's the same with the liberal, with left-wing, right? These particular groups, like, maybe they do have some form of engagement, but that engagement is not enough to actually break out of these echo chambers. And in terms of, like, they're still going to, this is still going to happen in other cases, and, like, I need to prove that Facebook is going to fix all of these problems. I don't have to prove that Facebook is going to fix all of these problems, but the thing here is that Facebook is the biggest the biggest perpetrator of things like fake news. It is the biggest news outlet in the world, and also probably in America as well. At the point in which that comes at a detriment to other people, then Facebook has the obligation to do so. Obviously, you're not going to be able to get rid of all fake news articles, but at the point in which there are over 200 million people that have access to that information, then Facebook needs to step in to take that out. Like, they can go and get that from the internet, that's fine, but not every single one of those 200 million people is likely to do that. That is why Facebook needs to step in, because it has such a huge audience and such a huge array of information that they have access to. But also, it's also really harmful for stereotypes. Like, it actually makes them worse, does not help them in any way, shape, or form, because it means that that engagement is not happening. And so people get into those echo chambers thinking that all gay men are pedophiles because they have no meaningful discussion.
Okay, so going on to this, he says that, again, yes, he's right. He agrees that there is some other fake news, and this would go on in other places, and this would go on. So again, because the censoring is not happening on places like news, it's not happening on YouTube, it's not happening on Twitter, because it's not happening in these others, why should Facebook be the only one that has to have censorship? There's no warrant. Whether they have a huge audience or not, there's no reason for them specifically to have to do this. It still exists in other spectrums, and if Twitter's going to be allowed to have that, and Facebook starts saying, hey, you can't post these articles, you can't have these conversations, you can't do these different things, and they start censoring it and taking people's posts away, it's going to push people to these other websites. There's no specific reason why Facebook should have to do it when others don't. He hasn't given that link. He hasn't given that warrant. There's a non-uniqueness, and because there's a non-uniqueness in this debate, there's no reason that Facebook should be the only one that has to have these censors. He's saying a should. If Facebook should do it, everyone should do it. And because that's not happening, we cannot make Facebook, or should make Facebook do that. But then he goes in to say that the engagement, sure, it does happen on occasion, but it's ineffective. One, engagement's never ineffective. Even if there is a disagreement, or even if the aspect of the fact that, let's say he said they don't change their minds or anything. But like, let's say I, who am a Christian, is having an argument with an atheist. Even if I don't change his mind a little bit, I've learned more about what he's thinking. And awareness of other people's socioeconomic situations, aware of other people's beliefs, and just the education of whether we agree or not, this is what people believe and this is what people think are out there, is important. So even if there's no agreements that's made, there is still an education that happens. Whether you agree with the education or not, it's still going to happen. Whether I agree with JB043, sorry, I don't know your name's argumentation in this debate specifically, doesn't matter. But I did learn some things that he has concerns with. This engagement on Facebook, whether it be for fake news or for real news, still exists. So whether, again, left wing, right wing, whether you don't agree, you're learning more about what they're coming from and what they're saying. This education and engagement is what specifically needs to happen on this, and we cannot censor that. Even if we do censor it, you look to the fact that it's not unique and it's not going to happen anyways. I had a freedom of speech contention, but I'm not even going to get into that because I feel like we have enough clash on the flow right now where we don't need to get there. But we cannot say, if he's going to claim democracy, we can't say democracy when what you're doing is going directly against that. Back to the April Fool's argument that he said earlier, he said that, sure, you can post fake news one day of the year, but this doesn't need to go consistently. You can't do that. You can't say it's allowed one time and not allow it. People can prank if they want to. People can do it if they want to. The education exists and there's still no uniqueness.
Right. So in terms of Facebook has no, we shouldn't do this on Facebook because other places don't have to do this. Like, if you wanted to know, I actually support Twitter, CNN, Fox, like any other news outlet doing this as well. So like, I don't really understand that. But the obligation that Facebook has, being the biggest provider of news sources in the world, and in the world, and also in specifically America as well, Facebook has that obligation to do so because Facebook, as an institution, has more people that access that news than anything else. It doesn't matter whether Twitter does this or not. It doesn't matter whether CNN does this or not, even though they probably should do that. And that's like a separate debate. We're talking specifically about Facebook here. But like, let's just look at some other things, right? And so the difference between things like CNN and Fox News is they are far more beholden to the accountability of their viewers than Facebook is. If people want to change something in Fox News or CNN, if they think that fake news is a thing and that they don't want to engage with that fake news, then they're going to boycott it by just not watching that and not engaging with CNN and Fox News. It's a lot harder for Facebook to do that, probably because they don't really care that much about people who don't use Facebook, as opposed to CNN and Fox News, which has that obligation to provide that accountability for its people. So like, that's completely different there. But you wanted to talk about democracy, right? I was waiting for this to come up, and it's going to come up right now. So how does this actually harm democracy? At the point in which you have a large number of impressionable people that are actually, whose echo chambers are influencing how they vote, how they engage with people around them and their choices. At the point in which fake news stories becomes heavily influential in deciding those opinions, it means that these people are not making, it means that democracy is, the value of democracy is detracted because people are being coerced into making irrational and ill-informed decisions because they're basing those votes on things on things like fake news, right? That is incredibly harmful to democracy. It means that the choices that people make and the voting that people do is not their own. It's influenced by completely fake stuff. That is incredibly harmful because it means that the democratic process is then harmed because people can literally get voted in based on complete lies. And obviously politicians do that anyway. But at the point in which it's not just the politicians doing that. And obviously, like, I think the politicians should be beholden to that accountability as well. Like, I don't think it's fair for me to say, but politicians don't do this. I think that they should be subject to that accountability too. At the point in which Facebook is proliferating this, and those 200 million people that use Facebook that also voted had their votes their influence swung by fake news articles, which is completely factually untrue, then that means that that democratic process is incredibly harmed. And at the point in which Facebook is actively perpetrating that, they have an obligation to fix that, especially when you get particularly because it means that people get voted in based on things that are completely and factually untrue, which then harms people who actually know their shit and vote on things based on.
Okay, so going specifically back to the argument about the education and the different things that happen here, again, I don't see his links and his warrants that specifically exist into this debate. We specifically say that CNN and Fox News are held to a different standard because they have to achieve their specific audience base. One, that's not true, specifically because we specifically see how CNN and Fox News are specifically said that they're for a certain right or left side of the democratic spectrum, and they don't care about the middle. You see that they're situated to one specific side, so you specifically see that they still have a care in that side and don't really give a care for the other. So that link there, that Fox News doesn't care, does not exist. Facebook has the same worry, and that's why I specifically said that. Facebook should not censor fake news if other sites are not doing it, because they could lose their audience base. Hey, they're not going to allow me to speak freely, which is one of my constitutions, whether it be fake or not. I'm going to go to Twitter. I'm going to go to a blog post. I'm going to go do these other things. So the aspect of why Facebook shouldn't have to do it is because they could lose an audience base for that. Now I'm going to go on to his democracy. I know it's technically in the last speeches, but he just brought this up, so I feel like I should be able to refute it. One, he specifically talks about how on this, fake news stories can hurt people in the voting and how people can vote that. Go to his very first and second speech where he says subjective journalism is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about specifically fake news that could hurt people's character and hurt people things, but one that's still subjective. My second on this is research and education. When you see a fake news article, it allows you the chance to go look it up, to research it, to be able to do that, which things happen. It happens for me. It happens for people that I've talked to. Hey, did you see that? Did you see what this post was? I researched that. It's not true. It's not accurate. Therefore, it increases education, which increases knowledge, which in turn increases democracy. But my third argumentation, and probably my biggest on this, is it happens all the time on the campaign trail. People like President Trump and Hillary Clinton and all these in these campaigns, they made fake accusations against each other. They posted articles and ads and different things of attacking people's character and attacking these different things that the others completely said were not true. If they can do that on the campaign trail, but we can't talk about that fake news article, that fake news situation that was on Facebook, if we can't discuss what we're seeing our leaders and our politicians doing by posting, hey, Donald Trump specifically said that Hillary Clinton was this. If that's fake and you're not allowing me to post that on Facebook when I'm hearing about it and getting my opinions and ideas, that's the lack of education, that's the non-uniqueness, and that's the lack of democracy that I'm talking about. You're saying fake news shouldn't be posted, but we see it happening in our campaigns all the time.
I mean, keep in mind, I did just outline the fact that I would say that politicians should also be accountable to the fake news that they proliferate as well. Like, there should be some form of accountability there, regardless of whether you want to talk about Facebook, you not having the right to talk about that fake news that Hillary Clinton talked about on Facebook. Like, Hillary Clinton should also be accountable to the fake news that she's perpetuating, and the same with any politician. Like, that's completely fair to say, but I also would draw you back to what I just said. In terms of research, like, again, it's fine that you might go and do that research, but that's not to say that every single person, every single one of the 200 and something million people in America that utilize Facebook and have access to these fake sites are going to do the same thing, especially when they're in their echo chambers. But also, probably the people that they associate with also share very similar viewpoints, which means that that level of engagement and research isn't actually going to do anything, because they're only going to be talking to people who have that same viewpoint about that same issue, which means that that education is actually not going to happen.
Okay, so one, the main reason on this debate and what it comes down to, I think one comes to this uniqueness. He specifically says that politicians should be held to the same standard, but we're not debating that today. We're saying Facebook, should they be based on this censor of fake news? And because of the fact that politicians, news censors, and all of these are not held to that, and there's no way that you're going to be able to hold somebody on a campaign trail to saying whether it's fake or not, and because that cannot exist, there is no reason that Facebook should have to do it also. The only reason Facebook should have to to is if it was a national mandation, if something happened where there was a law for this to happen, which would then constrict freedom of speech. But because they're not, you're saying in the status of the resolution, if Donald Trump makes a fake statement, I can't post it because it's fake news. Because they're not held to those standards, there's no way you should allow Facebook to be held to those standards. So because the uniqueness does not exist within this resolution, and it's still going to happen anyways, and others aren't being held to the same standard, Facebook should not be held to that standard and should not have to censor fake news. 2, the education. This goes back to the argument that I said earlier. Even if we don't agree on anything, I still was educated in how you live. I was educated, and that helps me bring awareness to your situation. Education specifically exists because of Facebook not censoring the fake news. And then again, we go to the democracy and the freedom of speech. Democracy is actually hurt with this because it doesn't allow the engagement in this situation. Thank you to my partner. It was an excellent debate. Thank you to the call out community.